Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we are taking a look at another challenging approach. This time we're going to head into Molde in northern Norway. This is a really beautiful approach. It's recently had a scenery released by ORBX, so we're going to use the ORBX Scenery, so thank you to them for sending it over. And what we'll do is we'll talk through how we're going to fly this approach, how we're going to manage the challenges it presents. It is an offset localizer approach, so for those of you keen to try out non-precision approaches, yeah, this is a good one to try it out on. And also we're going to take a look at the scenery, of course, once we arrive and have a look at the area. It is a really beautiful approach. It's an, as I say, offset localizer, so a non-precision approach that takes us through a sort of valley or a fjord. It takes us through that with a steeper approach as well, 3.5 degrees. So lots of ways to get it wrong, and we're going to see how we can avoid that today. Just before we do, I'd like to remind you about our partnership with Apex Gaming PCs, where we've created a line of specific 320 Sim Pilot PCs. They come with excellent now Intel processors, and there are two options, the Bus and the Manta. You can customize them on the website to the spec you want and get a code of 320 Sim Pilot for 5% off. You'll be supporting the channel if you do get one. So here we are then on the flight deck, and we've just departed from Molde. We've taken a left turn out and we're going to be heading downwind effectively, but not really relevant. What I'm going to do is show you a setup of the arrival in the box, in the McDo, the MCDU, and then we're going to fly that arrival, having briefed it and figured out some of the challenges. So let's of course bring up the charts. So here are the Navigraph charts for Molde. The code is Echo November Mike Lima. It is going to be runway 25 that is the interesting approach for us today. So the localizer Zulu runway 25. Now here is the issue. We have terrain on both sides of the approach, and they mean we cannot do a straight in approach to the runway. You can see it gets too close to this very high terrain sitting right here. So that is a bit of a nuisance. The other end, runway 07, has no problems at all. There's no terrain, so they've got a normal ILS there. But yeah, onto 25, it's only a localizer Zulu. So why is it a localizer and not a full ILS? Well, it's simply how they've set it up. It's a non-precision approach, which means there's no vertical guidance. That means we're going to have to fly this approach without the use of the vertical mode, which would normally on an ILS be the glide slope mode, the GS. So you'd normally see that on the top of your PFD. We have you'd have localizer and GS. Just excuse me, I'm just going to keep vectoring the airplane around myself, keeping it busy whilst we set up for this arrival without hopefully getting too close to any terrain. But yeah, so we're sort of hovering just south of the airfield at the moment. So this is interesting because it means we have a challenging part at the end of the approach where we need to turn onto final and get ourselves lined up with the center line. That's a common theme of these difficult or challenging approaches. They often have some sort of visual maneuvering at the ends that is slightly unusual. We also need to consider the fact it's a 3.5 degree approach. Now, nothing too shocking about that. That's not the most outrageous angle, but it does all add up, and I'll show you why. We have to fly this not as a normal ILS at 3.5 degrees, but also as a non-precision, which means we need to be fully stabilized when we begin the descent. What I mean by fully stabilized is, normally when we fly an ILS, and you'll see it on my streams and other videos, we can just head down the approach at a normal sort of speed and configure, put the wheels out, put the flaps out and slow down coming down the approach. Now that's harder to do on a steep approach, but even more so, this is a non-precision approach where we're going to need to use not heading vertical speed, we're going to use track FPA. So we're going to have the airplane flying, instead of a glide slope, it's going to fly a flight path angle, FPA. And I do have a video on the bird if you need any help with what that actually means, what the FPA is talking about and what it's going to represent or show us on the PFD. But you should be able to follow through with this video anyway. So the result of that is we have to be slowed down and configured earlier. So by NumLu, which is here, we need to have slowed the aircraft down to almost be fully configured. So at 3 miles to go, I'll be gear down, I'll be flaps 2. At 2 miles to go, and that's 2 miles to NumLu, I'll be flap 3. At 1 mile to go, I'm going to pre-select the angle for descent, 3.5 degrees, which means I'll just set it on the FCU. Again, we'll seal this as we go through. At half a mile to go, I'm going to go to flat full, and then at 0.3 miles to go, which in this case would be 11.6 on the DME, I'll pull the FPA and we'll start down. So by that point, we'll be at our approach speed and we'll have flat full out and we'll head down the approach. All quite straightforward. But But if you try and do this without slowing down first, you'll find that you just get high. Because when you're flying an angle, the 3.5 degree angle, the airplane will do a great job at maintaining 3.5 degrees, but if you put flap out, you will go high. So you'll be coming down like this, you'll put the flap out, you'll go above the glide slope, the airplane will put the nose down and maintain 3.5, but you'll stay above the line. You just parallel it. So you're coming down, you get pushed high by the flaps, and then you carry on down at 3.5, and it will do that for each stage of flap, so absolutely no good at all. We don't have the option of a vertical mode here on this approach. So these are the key challenges. It's going to be energy management and then configuring correctly as we head down the approach. Now, of interest is, why are we using the localizer approach? You can probably have spotted there is an RNP. Well, the RNP has pretty good minima, 1350 minima if we use both lateral and VNAV. Now, sadly, the fly-by-wire A32NX cannot do VNAV at the moment, so that's not an option for us. But if you look on the localizer chart, you'll see the minima is slightly lower. It's 1190. The airfield's effectively at sea level. So this is getting us even closer. So if the cloud base is pretty low, let's say you've got clouds at around 1,000 feet, then this is giving you the ability to fly the aircraft. We're going to get pretty close to some of these hills. It's going to be quite a spectacular view for the passengers. Yeah, this is going to give you the ability to get nearer to the runway with a better chance of seeing it. So if you've got low cloud, this could be a better approach. CDFA, by the way, means continuous descent final approach. Most approaches are like that these days. There used to be a time where people or approaches could be flown in, you'd descend down to the 1250 level, then down to your minima level, fly along until you could see the runway and then land. But we don't do that anymore. We'll do it all continuous. So 3.5 degrees from 4,000 feet, continuously down all the way to our minima. So the normal RNP minima of LNAV VNAV is 1350, so it's higher, so it's worse. There are, over here, better minimas, but this requires LPV, and this is using EGNOS and all sorts. We're not going to be doing that today, and it's not something that a lot of airlines will have fitted or have paid for or certified or trained for. So you can actually hear the rad out going off as we fly over these mountains. There are some alternative minimas over here, so we could do a straight-in LNAV only approach. So this we could do with the fly-by-wire A32NX. We could simply use just lateral nav and fly an FPA RNAV approach, but you'll actually see the minima is still higher. It's 1360. So the best minima we have available is using the ILS Zulu, the localizer Zulu 1190. So that's what we're going to use. So that is the challenge. So let's have another final look over the chart. If we come up to the top, we can see there's quite a lot of notes. Look at that view. Absolutely love flying over this part of the world. It's just stunning all round. Right, so we are still sort of hovering around the south side here. As you can see, localizer not to be used outside 15 degrees either side. So that could be because of the terrain. I think if you're 15 degrees out, you're going to find yourself pretty close to some terrain, so you're probably not going to want to be there anyway. But note 2, exercise extreme caution when intercepting runway centerline due to raising terrain north of the localizer at runway centerline. So that is talking about this terrain here. If you look at 3 miles, so when you're at 3 DME, we can expect to be at an altitude of somewhere about 1,000 feet, pretty normal, minimum, effectively 1,100 feet. So we're at 1,000 feet. The terrain just to our right next to us, 2,500 feet, rising up to 3,200 feet. So it's way above us, and that is incredibly likely to trigger a GPWS if you point at it. So what it's saying is exercise caution when intercepting the center line, because if we get to our minima, which will happen at about 3 miles, and you just turn to the right to head over to that extended center line, because we need to make a right turn to intercept it and then a left turn, so we're lined up with the runway. If you do that, you're going to get a GPWS off of this terrain. So you have to do a nice, gentle, safe turn. You don't want to go diving over too quickly. There's no need for it. So that note is written there, and it's very, very important. You also see final intercepts the runway center line less than 1,400 meters from the threshold. This does not comply with PANS ops. So this is a set of criteria, obviously, that are set when you're building your airports and designing the procedures, and they're basically saying it doesn't make it. It's outside of what they would consider acceptable. So it is an interesting one. That's not to say it's not safe. It is just outside of the specific criteria that comply with PANS ops. You'll notice we need DME and ADF. We are going to fly this with the localizer DME, the Mike Echo, which luckily is coded to be at 3 miles from the runway. When it says 3 miles, it's actually 2.3. So there's a bit of a discrepancy in the DME. So we'll just have to be aware of that as well. I'm, of course, going to put my progress page in. So let's set up exactly that, the MCDU. So I'm just going to move this over here, make it a bit easier. So first of all, let's put in the arrival. So I'm going to put in the localizer 25 Zulu. We're not going to worry about the star, but I am going to put in a via, we'll come in via Erpa because we're to the south side. So Erpa, lap, VU, and then the approach is what I'm expecting. Let's insert that. Let's check the flight plan. Erpa, lap, VU, and then via Numlu, there is the approach. Fantastic news. Then the RadNav page is tuned to Mike Echo 109.1, course 255, which is all correct. Progress page, let's put in Echo November Mike Lima 25. That goes in there. So that gives me the actual distance to the runway. We can see we're pretty close to the airport in my circling around. Performance page, we have already loaded the weather, 101315 light winds. This is perfect conditions to do this, by the way. So you've got to remember, you could be doing this in the middle of winter in strong winds with thunderstorms around, with snowstorms around, whatever you fancy. But today I'm just showing you how we fly it. So 1190 into the barrow. And finally, we are going to put in the go around altitude here of join hold 5,000 feet. Fuel prediction, we have plenty of extra fuel. I made sure of it, secondary, not active. So there we go. So hopefully you are feeling relatively set up and briefed. So the threats for this approach are the fact that we have an offset and slightly steeper approach, meaning the transition to final will be slightly trickier. So how we're going to manage that is that we're going to make sure that we configure the aircraft early and we are fully stabilized at Numlu. And we're also going to make a gentle turn onto the runway center line. We're not going to make an exaggerated right-left turn. We're going to take it nice and easy so we don't end up getting or setting the GPWS off. We also have a issue with terrain all around. So to avoid that, we're going to stick to our procedure. So 5,000 feet at Erpa, 5,000 feet at Latvu, but we're going to have the speed right back, and then we're going to make the turn here nice and slow. So I'm going to be flap 2, and I'm going to be 180 knots as a maximum, making this turn at Latvu, which is 15 miles out. And then I'm going to put it into managed speed after Latvu, and then we can configure as we descend to 4,000 feet. And this is the real gotcha here. Latvu to Numlu is only 4 miles, and you've also got to lose 1,000 feet. So in that time, I would want to configure, but I also need to lose the height. So in fact, I'm going to be even slower. I'm going to be flap 2, manage speed as I pass Latvu and intercept that localizer. And then we can descend nice and safely to 4,000 feet and put the gear and rest of the flap out. So we'll see how that works out. I haven't actually tried this out in the sim yet, so I'm looking forward to this one to see how it goes. But yeah, so the terrain being the other issue. So we should be relatively visual with it today, but we don't need to be. We've got that nice or reasonably low minima, shortly after which we'll need to make our visual turn and correction onto the extended center line. MSA is obviously very high all around, up to 7,200 feet, which is what we would expect. Just as a side note, just to show you the runway, it is a short runway. It's only 2,200 meters with a bit of an inset threshold, so the landing distance available for runway 25 quite low, 2,081 meters. So that easily qualifies it for a medium auto brake landing, and if there was any wetness to the runway or snow or anything like that, certainly max reverse as well. But this is somewhere where you would have a very good sense of the landing distance required. You'd use a calculator to make sure you've got all the right bits set up. Okay, I think it's time we go and begin the approach. So to start with, I'm going to route direct to the waypoint Erpa, which is where we expect it to come in via nav. There we go. So the airplane's doing it correctly. At Erpa, above 5,000 feet, maximum speed 220 knots because of these tight turns and terrain, but we are going to be even slower than that. So localizer approach, we've talked about how we're going to configure. What modes are we going to fly it in? Well, I'm going to fly it with the LS buttons on, so we're going to turn those on because it is a non-precision approach, but we are using the localizer. So we'll get the Mike Echo localizer displaying along the bottom. I am then going to also use track FPA. So as we get closer, I'm going to press this to track FPA and then follow me through basically as we do it. And you'll be able to pause and rewind the video. I think it's the easiest way. If I talk through it too much now, it'll probably not sink in very well. Make sure we have the medium brake set. It does struggle. I've got my hardware for that. Right, so Erpa above 5,000 feet, you'd of course need to follow your minimum safe altitudes on this leg as well. So let's head down a bit and slow down, activating the approach phase now. This is all about getting the energy back earlier because it's going to make our lives so much easier. We're already on the QNH, manage speed now, and let's descend to 5,000 feet. Making that up slightly. In reality, you'd have, like I said, you'd be following your charts. And so the approach begins. So Mike Echo is still identified. We're arriving at ERPA. I can put that into ARC. It doesn't really matter what screen I look at. But there we go. ERPA, 5,000 feet, 220 knots. Let's start slowing down. So flaps to 1. Put the flaps out to 1. Speed out to star. Weight, by the way, we're about 60 tons for this approach. So we're going to turn left here. We have to stay at 5,000 feet. So because we can't go down, and we know that's going to leave us a little bit high later, it's better to slow down, and that way we have more energy out of the aeroplane. We've already taken the energy out. And also, of course, I'm going to have more drag out when I have flap 2. So let's go to flap 2 now. There they are, flap 2. Got the landing lights on, passengers are sat down. Beautiful, beautiful part of the world to fly. So stunning. So this is the valley I believe that we're going to descend into. So we'll get the speed right back on this leg. So we could let the airplane, if we leave it now in managed speed, it will come back to F speed. I might just select 160 knots for a bit. I think we are making pretty good progress on that, because we're going to sit here maintaining this for this next sort of, what is that, about 4 miles. Yeah, 4 miles to Latvu. So at some point, after the next turn, we need to intercept the localizer. So at this point, I'm going to swap over to track FPA. So now, although it doesn't look too different, our flight directors have changed and we have the bird. Now, I am not going to manually fly, and this is important. I'm going to use the autopilot to fly this, because these flight directors are no good to follow without the autopilot. They're not designed for human consumption, I always say. So we will use the autopilot. Alternatively, we could do this manually, but you'd be giving yourself an incredibly high workload, not practical, and not really a sensible thing to be doing in this case, unless you really had to. Right, so now we have track FPA. I can select a track if I want to fly it, although it won't matter because we're using managed nav, and I can select a flight path angle, which will come later. So we're in a good space energy wise. I'm pretty happy with this. We're going to turn shortly. We have that localizer identified, the Mike Echo. I'm going to let the airplane intercept it initially in nav. In the real aircraft you could do either. You could let nav do it initially, or you can press lock now. So I'm just going to let it start the turn, and we should see that localizer come to life anyway. So we're sitting here flat 2, 160. We've got a lot of control. Remember, after Latvu, we can then descend. Let me show you on the chart. I should have this up. So after Latvu, we can go down to 4,000 feet. So that's what we're going to do here. 4,000 feet in the window. But remember, now I'm using FPA. Now you could do this. You could still be in VS. It wouldn't be a disaster if you were. So let's go for a 3-degree FPA down to 4,000 feet. So there's FPA -3, 4,000 blue, 1,000 feet to go. Let's go to manage speed to slow down. Here's the localizer coming in. I'm just going to press lock star. It goes into straight away. And now we're almost there. We're already coming up to our descent point. So I'm going to go gear down and flaps to 3. And remember, at 1 mile to go, I'm going to start finishing the configuring. So Numlu is at 11.3. At 11.3 we start down at 3.5 degrees. At 11.3 DME we are at 13.3. So we have 2 miles to go. 11, 12, 13. Okay, so 2 miles to go until we begin our descent. So we're in a good place actually. At 1 mile to go, I'm going to arm 3.5. I'm hoping it'll go into lock star by that point. This may not have even been enough. It is a really tight little turn, that intercept and descent. So probably should have descended a bit more than 3 degrees for that first leg. But we'll make it work. So 12.3, this is all still very safe, very sensible. There we go, it's gone into outstar, so I need to put in 3.5. I'm not using it yet, it's just ready in the window. And then at 11.8, I'm going to go to flap full. There it is, flaps to full. And then at 11.6, which is 0.3 before, I'm going to pull the FPA. Oh, it's gone out the window. The real aircraft will hold it a bit longer. But there we go, 11.6. We're a bit late, so 3.5 in the window, FPA 3.5. So you can see how quickly that can unravel, no matter how carefully you plan and brief it. Let's put 5,000 feet in the window for the go around. Very important you don't have that beneath you. You would only set that when you know you're below it. If you were to set it beneath you, you could have a situation where the aircraft will try and capture it. Very important you don't have it beneath you. So if your go around altitude was below us, let's say it was 2,000 feet, we wouldn't set it until we were below 2,000 feet. Anyway, the airplane's doing a great job, 3.5 degrees, but see, we have no vertical guidance, so we need to look on here. 10 DME, we should be at 3510. I'd say we are, what are we, about 50 feet high? So I'm just going to go straight away, let's go to 4 degrees, and then see how we're doing at the next check. That should fix it in maybe a mile, but this is a steep approach, so it could take a little bit longer than a mile. So at 9 DME on here, we should be at 3140. So there you go. So we have started down, we're fully configured for landing, everyone's in the right place, and now we just need to watch out for the terrain. As you can see, it is coming up all around us. So 9 miles, there you go, 9.0, 3140. I'd say we're spot on, so back to 3.5, and we'll leave it there. Fly-by-wire FPA mode is doing a great job. So this is the valley, we are now descending into it. This terrain over here rising up very high. We are just coming down this leg here on the approach. Next steps. Okay, so what are we doing next? Well, of course, we're checking the altitudes as we go. So 8 DME now. What do we need to be at 8 miles? 2770. 2770, 8.0. Perfect. So we're spot on. So as long as we stay at 3.5, this should work out. Remember, if we hadn't configured and I put flap out now, we would balloon. We would get high and then have to correct even more. It's very difficult and high workload thing to do. So our minimum is 1190. So we need to be visual at that point. At 1190, I'm going to disconnect the autopilot, turn off the flight directors, but leave the bird on, and then turn and intercept the runway. So we can now see it. There we go, 2 whites, 2 reds. I don't even think, I think you would struggle to see the pappies at this point at the real airport, but there we go. Ready, altimeter's come alive, which is good news because it matches. QNH is set correctly at 1013. This is so crucial. You must have the correct QNH. Remember, if you don't, your altitude will be wrong, and although it matches the chart, you'll actually be at the wrong altitude. So you must have the correct QNH set. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can press B, and it should do that for you, even if you're using live weather. So let's check now. 6 miles. Pilot monitoring would be doing the checking, but yet just below 2030. 5 miles, we're looking for 1660. So we are visual. So you can see the temptation is to just disconnect, go right, left, and line up with that center line. But that's what you'd be flying straight towards. So we really don't want to do that immediately. Let's arm that and ding on the cabin. There we go. So we've still got medium auto brake. So 5 miles, 1660, spot on. You see, when you have it settled, it works very well. There could be some strong winds that would adjust it, but the Airbus is flying a flight path angle of 3.5 degrees. It takes into account the wind and everything. It's just absolute genius. It's such a good mode. So I'm just going to not do anything yet. There's no point me disconnecting and making my life difficult. Okay, so we are now through 100 above. Minimum. There's minimum. We are visual. Autopilot off. Take off the flight directors. You'd get pilot monitoring to set the inbound runway track. But now a gentle turn. We don't need to do anything extreme. I don't need to pull up on the nose because it was already set to the right amount, 3.5 degrees. We're on 2 whites, 2 reds on the pappies. So we're just going to gently ease ourselves over to that center line. No rush. It's runway 25, so just set the track left a bit for that. You'd also take into account the wind. We've got a light headwind, so not making too much difference for us here. As you can see, the visual part is often the most, we tend to get most excited about it, but the reality, and especially on an approach like this, is it's all about the approach before that. If you have sorted out the fact that you had the energy back and you had the approach stabilized, then this part, you've got plenty of time to do it nice and gently though, without turning us straight in towards those hills. Keeping 2 whites, 2 reds. They've got the lights into the water, so this is a very good touch there. I think they've done good work on this scenery. It looks spot on. 200. Picking up 1,000 feet per minute there, getting a little bit steep. 100. Dipped us into 3 reds, but it's a short runway. I'm going to hold it here. 50, 40, 30, 20. Into the flare, idle. 10. Bit of a float. 5. There's touchdown. That would be just about main wheels on those last markers. So go to max reverse. We've got medium auto brake. As long as we touch down in the touchdown zone, that works for us. There's 70 knots. Reverse idle. Medium does an excellent job at slowing the aircraft, especially in the dry like this. And now we can release those brakes with manual brakes. And welcome to Molde Airport. So before we carry on, I just want to show you a few unique features about this approach that relate to the things we've seen so far. Now, please do ignore everything you see inside now. I'm using a replay, the third-party replay, so it's not going to be correct in terms of modes. But I just want to show you some interesting things. So this was the conditions we flew it in. We had a light headwind coming through the valley. Now, the headwind obviously means that wind's coming through here from the sea, so you won't get much turbulence. There's not much terrain over there. But picture this approach with a headwind, let's say, from the right, and you'd have some pretty rough turbulence for the final maneuver onto the final approach. So it's all very well doing this in 5 knots headwind, but yeah, it can lead itself to some really nasty weather, and that's true of any airport near terrain, of course. And as well, that final turn onto the centerline, if you're trying to do that in a wind, it will very much change your visual picture. So let me just accelerate through. So there we go. So we had minima, we went visual, gentle turn, right, left, and it's intercepted. It all seems fine. But our picture was quite easy to make sense of here. But if we had a strong crosswind, of course, our nose could be sitting somewhere over here, maybe 270 in an extreme case, or 260. So you're going to have to point the nose right into the hill, even if you're tracking towards the runway. So that is an interesting issue when flying around terrain. It can give a really weird visual picture to the pilots. Also, we've got the weather issue. So we had scattered clouds today, and what was a lower level coming down to? Let's just cover it over. Let's go to 100%, and let's put the bottom down to our minima. So we had about 1,100 feet. So if we were to go visual at 1,200 feet, and then I just rewind us a little bit, you can see that we are basically not visual. We weren't not really at 2,500 feet. I'm not sure what's going on there. That must be it. Something strange going on here. The cloud base should be a bit lower than that, but let's just lower it down to somewhere near minima. Not sure what it's based on, maybe on QNH. But as you can see, here we go. So that is just after 1,000 feet, and you can see we can almost see the runway, but we've got no idea really what the terrain off to the right is. Now this is a little bit extreme. You might not quite make it in off of this approach. Let's put it to 500. Let's see. So anyway, we're just below minima here, but yeah, it's nasty. So you can see the temptation would be just to get yourself over to the centerline, because you can't really appreciate the extent of the terrain that is sitting all around us on the right hand side here. So that is an interesting part of this approach. The next thing I'm going to show you is the time of day. So you could do this at night. And remember, pilots, we don't get the luxury of just doing this in nice weather. We will quite often have to do this at night. So let me turn off the dome light. We wouldn't have that on. But there you go. That is your view. Now, I don't think that the runway could be even harder to see than that. Can we reduce the visibility, I wonder? Well, I haven't figured out how, if you can. But yeah, you could easily not have the runway, just these first part of the lights visual, as you saw earlier in the daylight. But over there, for the whole approach, if I rewind the approach, you get no sense. There you go. Here we are, 1,700 feet, descending in the valley, and there is terrain all over the right-hand side, and we have no clue. We are descending in the darkness, and this is what the procedure is designed for. This is the key thing. So as pilots, it's our job and our responsibility to keep our situation awareness high enough that we know where the terrain is, even though we've got absolutely no visual clue. So in this moment here, we are somewhere here on this approach. I can tell you, in fact, we're at 5 miles, so we're just here. Yeah, we've got huge terrain off to the right, can't see any of it, and you would end up just flying the approach and reaching minima, which would be somewhere around 1,000. There, which luckily we could see. And again, the risk here, trying to turn right into all that terrain that you just cannot see. You've got to pay attention to the note on the chart. That one little line there is going to save you from a GPWS warning. And all it says is just note 2, exercise extreme caution. Not very useful. Airlines will often have their own briefing sheets for airports like this to help you out, because there's more information than they'll be able to fit onto a chart. So we vacated the runway now. We're going to head in and park up. This is a small apron, as you can imagine, but they've done a really nice job recreating it to match the real one. All these ground markings, look at that runway ahead. An interesting dilemma here where you can see that this airfield is designed mainly for general aviation because our wingtip goes over the stop bar. So no part of the aircraft is allowed over these bars, otherwise you count as infringing the runway. But there are some places where this can happen, where our wingspan is just too big, and as you can see, it actually goes over that line on its own. So yeah, not great. But yeah, that's how it is at Molde. So we're going to park up here. We'll take stand 1, why not? And then we're going to explore the scenery. It's quite a small terminal, but I believe we have a fully modelled interior, as you've sort of come to expect from these add-on sceneries these days. I love driving the airplane around with the shadow like this coming from with the sun behind you. Really gives you a sense of the scale of the machine you're operating, and then you get to park up looking at it there. Very nice. And you can see that's a 3D building in there. So brakes are on. APU is available. We'll shut down. Let us... Oh, passenger light should have been off. The reason for the sun changing weather is I had to restart the simulator. I was being too confident with all my replays and so on, and eventually the program decided to have enough. But beacon off. Let's go for a bit of an explore. So here we are parked up now then, and let's take a look over at the terminal. So as I said, very small terminal. A lot of the aviation around here is regional and even more so just general aviation, but they've done PBR textures on the terminal. There you go, Avenor, and we've got Molde, Lufthaven. Oh, yeah, very nice. And we even got people modelled inside, which is not something I've seen. I don't think I've seen that before, actually. I suppose it's possibly easier to do if you've got a slightly smaller airfield. I've never been inside the Molde terminal, but there you go. Look at that. A whole host of people enjoying the view of the sunset and the airplanes. Not a whole lot of traffic, but there you go. Widerøe would be a classic airline coming in here, probably using Dash 8s. There's a departure board. Look at that. So what have they got? Got Oslo, lots of Oslo, Bergen, no surprise. So Norway being where we are, Sandefjords, Amsterdam. You've got so KLM may even come in here. Yeah, okay. So maybe a few more flights than I'm giving credit for. So perhaps it's a little bit busier. Got some suits there. So very, very impressive actually. The interior, very complete. Look at that. Even boarding gates with signs up and times. That is, yeah, good fun. I always say I like it. A little diorama is always nice. Always adds a bit to your flying, especially if you're going to be doing some general aviation or loading up. What do they got here? All the magazines, Lego sets, it looks like. Excellent. Yeah, very nice. But as you can see, tiny terminal. So not too many flights going at once, I'd hope, or that would soon be frustrating for the customers. What happens? What if we go through a door? Think we've run out of terminal there, but yeah, very nice. Oh, there's an upstairs as well. Look at that. TUI advert. Very good. It does eventually run out. It's a bit like a film set. Oh dear. Right. Let us take a look at something else. I do get amused looking at models of terminals. So here we have what appears to be the administration. Yeah, so airport offices. General aviation can come over here, get the logbook signed. Clock not moving. That would have been a pretty good detail. Fire station. So lots of fire trucks, which is something we'll talk about a bit later. Yeah, it's a huge fire station. Surprised. Maybe they do the de-icing and fueling from some vehicles in there as well. And then we have the general aviation with some custom liveries, I believe. So these should represent aircraft of the area. Lima November. I'm assuming that's the code for Norway. But yeah, these have been custom made by the team to give you the true, authentic Molde experience. I like this as well. Is this due to the weather? What have we got here? Is that oil stains or is that a bit of ice left over? If I change the weather, does that move? What if we put into clouds? Oh, maybe it is oil stains or something like that. Broken clouds. Which brings me on to my next point. If you look at the ground markings, all very nice. Stands are all in the right place. Got the hold markings as we discussed already. They've updated the photo texturing, not just of the airport, but obviously around it as well to remove any of the graphical glitches and errors. But this is a nice little point. There's I believe that's the control tower for Molde, and it's it's hidden out there. If this is where the air traffic controller gets to sit for a tower control, I would very much like to apply for that job because that looks absolutely great fun. What a picturesque place to spend your day with not hopefully too much traffic. You can see our Mansa Airbus parked up over there. sort of dominating the row. And out here we have the fire practice ground. So they have a serious fire safety level at Molde, considering how small it is. But there you go, got their training sort of aircraft set up. Always concerning, obviously, the passengers. You get to see that as they taxi out, because of course this runway is a backtracking runway, which they've got. This is what this sort of teardrop of yellow line is for. So you'd come down here and follow that line around with the nose and get yourself pointing back the right way, because being a short runway, we don't have too much space to play with, especially as off each end is straight in the water. Nice to see some little boats parked up there in the bay, and you've got the mounted approach lights out into the water, of course, because there's no space to fit them on the ground as you go in there. Oh, very nice indeed. This cobbling around the edge is very nice as well. I do like that. Because it is sort of just built up into the water, as you'd expect, really. So, of course, we can't visit Norway in the middle of December when I'm making this video and not check out the live weather and the inevitable snow. There it is. So this is more how you can expect to find this airport. It's it's modelled there. I'd probably expect a bit of snow on the roof. It would be nice to see that, but I don't know what the criteria are. But you can see some of the ground lines showing through, slightly obscured. It does look very, very convincing. But yeah, this is a more typical view for this airfield, and you can see that 2,000 meters suddenly doesn't look so long when you cover it in snow and expect the airplane to stop on it. So some careful calculations will have to be made on your takeoff performance and landing performance. But there we go. That's the live weather situation today. And of course, let's go back to what we had, and let's check out the nighttime. So this is just before dawn. What have we got? Yeah, we got the lights for the car park, got the lights around the ramp. Too often these lights are yellow in real life, and that does cause issues when you're trying to follow yellow lines on the ground, especially in the rain. But there you go. And I love this. Excellent taxiway lighting represented in Microsoft Flight Simulator as ever. All the stop signs, these are always illuminated very bright. I say stop signs, they're runway markers. They're showing you the next thing ahead of you now is a runway, so you do not want to get confused and roll onto that. Doesn't look like there's any red stop bars, but I'm not sure if there are in the real airfield. Perhaps not. They tend to be a larger airfield sort of thing. Runway lighting done correctly. Lovely. Yeah. Very atmospheric, very nice. And then you got the town just behind the airport over there. So that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been interesting for you. Just another of those sorts of approaches that give you something extra to think about, and certainly the threats are more easily identifiable. Hopefully it ran clearly and you can follow it through. Give it a go in your simulator at home. Try it out. You can use the A32NX, or of course any simulator you're using an Airbus in. You can have a go at trying out that sort of approach, and a bit of an insight into localizer only approaches. Not something we see much of on the channel, so good excuse to try one out. There'll be plenty more live streams and videos coming soon to the channel, where we look at more Airbus guides as well as other aircraft in the streams and so on. So do please subscribe if you'd like to see more of those. Otherwise, we'll see you again in another video or live stream soon. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.